Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. Thanks for joining another installment of our series, Understanding Our New World. And we're really delighted today to be joined by Max Stier, who is the president and CEO of the Partnership for Public Service, which is a really important group working for to advance effective government and inspired public service. Let me tell you a little bit about Max. Has an undergraduate degree from Yale, a law degree from Stanford. He's worked in all three branches of the federal government. He worked as a legislative aide for Jim Leach from Iowa. Worked for several judiciary capacities, including clerking for Justice Souter. I'd love to hear more about that. And also worked in the executive branch at both HUD and the Department of Justice as attorneys in those positions. So really wide-ranging experience. In 2001, he helped create the Partnership for Public Service, very important group that is trying to encourage careers in public service, train government leaders, and also support just American society's appreciation of government. Their mission is pretty simple. It's to build a better government and a stronger democracy. So really important work. Max and his colleagues have collaborated on a lot of projects, and one they want to draw your attention to is a terrific book that came out earlier this year called "Who is Government?" Maybe it was late last year, early this year, which was based on a number of articles written by the Washington Post. Max is profiled in one of the essays, and his group is described too. So Max and his team has been just focusing on the importance of public service, and particularly during this time when the environment is extremely hostile. Lots of things are going on that we're reading about and trying to understand. And Max and his colleagues have provided really important resources for people in the public sector. Everything from legal defense ideas to advocacy and public support, and just framing the severity of this crisis in really stark and important terms. So lots to talk about. So Max, thanks so much for joining us.
It's pleasure, a real pleasure to be part of this conversation. Look forward to it.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your academic background. I mean, you went to Yale. Were you always a sort of political science, government history person? Was that always kind of the direction your career was inclining you towards?
So I definitely, from a very early age, cared a lot about what was happening in the world and politics, especially. I grew up in Iowa for junior high and high school. It just was a different level of infiltration. You had candidates that would come into living rooms literally across the state during presidential years. So politics was something of a deep interest of mine. I actually at college though. I was involved in a bunch of political things, but I was a humanities major. It was a brand new major just started that was interdisciplinary and was fantastic. But it was traditional liberal arts as opposed to political science. So I was neither political science nor history major. It was, and if I were thinking about what I could have done, I was philosophy was a real possibility for me. So. In any event, though, I think we all choose our paths without a lot of planning. Even though we like to believe we can control for the future, and politics was sort of front and center for a long time in my early part of my career.
No, your father was a surgeon, as I understand, and your mom was a law and art history professor who also wrote mysteries. Tell us a little bit about your parents.
Well, so all I can say, John, is that it's quite remarkable the amount of work you've done in looking at myself. So I'm preparing for this. So I appreciate that. And you're right. My dad died actually when I was 3 years old. He was a orthopedic surgeon. My mom did get married, and my stepdad worked at the State Department. So that was sort of an introduction to government and the reason why I was in DC for a few years. My mom, is to this day she's here now in Washington at a retirement community, but she loves to learn. She was a PhD psychologist. She had three kids under the age of 7 when my dad passed, and she then had a successful career as a psychologist, and then went to law school because she was interested in the intersection of law and psychology, and art has always been her passion. So she sort of you know brings it all together in the art law stuff. And in DC, her favorite thing of all time is to be in a museum seeing art, and there's plenty of those here. So a good place for her.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned Iowa and politics, and the namesake of our institute spent some time in Iowa and looking at a presidential run. Tell us about your connection to Paul Simon.
Well, so it's interesting, and again, it does bring a smile to my face that Paul Simon was an important figure for me. Coming out of college, I knew that I wanted to be involved in the presidential race at that time, and now you're talking about the '88 campaign. So this was in '87. I graduated, and I first went to work for Joe Biden in Iowa. I ran a set of counties for him as a field organizer. And then when Joe Biden dropped out of the race, I actually picked him up at the airport in Iowa when he was making his sort of withdrawal tour. Um, the entire Biden operation, which was probably the most effective operation in the state, went through a process and decided to go to Paul Simon. And so, we all took over responsibilities. We merged with the Simon operation, and I ran again a larger set of counties, including my home county in Johnson County, for Paul Simon. And I think I won all my counties, to be clear about this. And as a result of that, I went on to Minnesota, where I was the field director for the entire state. That's one of the great things about political campaigns is that they have such a short natural lifespan that you can actually do a bunch of them even in a single cycle, and I did, and move up very quickly. I mean, it's a real meritocracy. And unfortunately, I think for our country, Paul Simon did not win the nomination. He dropped out himself, and I went off to run a congressional race, a top targeted race in Indiana. And we'll always, I have many friends from the Simon campaign that I keep track of today. That whole Simon operation, still has reunions and everything else like that. So, yeah, feel very connected to Paul Simon, and it's a real pleasure to be doing anything with an institution, affiliated with him.
Great. In fact, Sheila Simon passes on her best wishes, and she remembers you from that campaign. And as you know, Sheila went on to become lieutenant governor of Illinois and is now a law professor here. So she passes on her best wishes.
Well, and back at her, I remember her very well. And those were those were long days. Not long ago for her, but long ago for me. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's great.
Well, Max, let's talk about, I mean, just I'd like to touch on maybe your work with Justice Souter because he is such in kind of a quiet way, an iconic figure in American life in terms of just this whole kind of legacy of restraint and sort of providing great service, but not feeling like the job is owed to him or belongs to him. Tell us about what you learned working with Justice Souter.
Yeah. So look, I mean, just to take a quick step back for those that are thinking about jobs for themselves, I think you need three things for a good job, and they're a sense of purpose, a working with great people, and having real responsibility. And I think if you have those three elements, there are many lids for every pot. And there's a tendency for people to look for the flashy subject matter that they care about. And the reality is you need those three things, I think, to have a satisfying job experience. And Justice Souter certainly offered all of those. And most prominently, just working with extraordinary people. And again, I think too many people go to law school because it's they don't know what else they want to do, so it becomes a default piece. And again, career advice is swim against the current. Make sure that you are choosing to be where you're going because you wanted to be there, not because that's what everyone else around you is doing or that was the easiest path. But if you do go to law school, I think clerking for a judge is one of the very, very special things that you get to do because you get to see the sort of pinnacle of the legal profession from the inside at the very front end of your career, and you get to work very closely with exceptional people. And the judiciary of our country, especially the federal judiciary, had a history of just extraordinary talent. I think unfortunately that is changing, and the criteria has changed, which is very bad for all of us. But Justice Souter, in my view, was one of the most exceptional human beings I've ever met in my life. And I really feel a great deal of gratitude for having a chance to work with him. And so when I say exceptional human being, why is that? And it begins again with values. There's, no one I've met in my lifetime who was more grounded in ethical behavior and intellectual honesty, and in, the sort of disciplined thinking that you really want to see in many things, but especially in judges. He was someone who questioned, the, foundational first principles in every case. He came to it with fresh eyes, and he, did the hard work of making sure that there were not assumptions that he was making that was the basis of his decisions, but rather things that he had thought through thoroughly. You said something I think very important, and that is he was a judicial conservative, not a political conservative, not a political liberal. That was not part of the job, but he was a judicial conservative. And what that meant was that he understood that his job as a justice, as a judge in our system, meant that he was to resolve the case or controversy before him, and to have the humility to understand that he was a non, representative, branch. His job as a justice of the Supreme Court, he was not elected; he was appointed, and he needed to make sure that he was being a judge and not a politician. And I do think, unfortunately, we are seeing too little of that. He was someone who respected precedent. He understood again that being a conservative, that he needed to follow the precedent, the prior court decisions. He needed to not make law, but really interpret law according to some very careful principles. And these are all things that I think are no longer the norm, either on the Supreme Court or in many courts. And I think that's very bad for our country. And I think many of the problems that we are seeing stem from judges, and in particular a Supreme Court that has offered a vision of where they wanted to take our country, rather than being restrained in their appreciation for the role that they played.
Right. Well, yeah, and I would just say to students, I mean, when you're looking to kind of study some of our best traditions, I think Justice Souter and just the whole notion of a judicial temperament and just,
Yeah,
approaching evidence carefully and not
yeah,
letting your own ideological agendas drive things. I mean, it's so rare, as you say, Max, and so
yeah.
critical.
Yeah, yeah, and he was it's remarkable because he was a very private person and also a very charming person. And um, there was a high degree of positive consistency between his um, perspective on how he needed to be and to treat other people around him, and his sense of community and civil society that was represented in his judicial philosophy as well. So, and you said something also important, was that he never, ever, ever confused his individual persona with the job that he had. And in fact, being in Washington was never something that he wanted. He was a New Hampshire boy from, his toes to his head. And, he believed he had a responsibility to serve, and he did that, and then he went home. He was not someone who would ever die happily in his job, and he was not someone who confused being a justice with who he was as an individual. And I think that's very important as well. I think especially for judges and especially justices on the Supreme Court, everyone around you tries to tell you what you want to hear rather than the truth. And he was very aware of that, and always somebody who stayed grounded in the reality of the world around him.
Well, Max, let's go to 2001, and you are having an important conversation with a gentleman, Sam Heyman, who was a veteran of the RFK Justice Department, and talk about the conversation that ensued and the commitment that flowed from that conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, this comes back to the most important principle that I would offer in terms of advice for thinking about especially jobs, but it's more than that, and that is, um, you know, don't plan for your future. Maximize your decision making around present value as opposed to trying to get someplace else. I think people underappreciate how contingent the world is, and today's world is way more contingent than it's ever been in my lifetime. And what that means effectively is that the best way to create future optionality and opportunity is to focus really exclusively on the present. Don't take a job today because you think it will lead you to something else. Take a job today because it will grow you the most, and that will create the best opportunities going forward. You will close more doors by trying to plan your life than you will open them. And 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 I say all that because this is true in that conversation you just identified. I had been the deputy general counsel at HUD. That was a job I had no idea I was going to take until I had, drinks with a friend of mine who suggested that I go in to talk to the HUD secretary. And same here. After I left the job in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, I had no idea what I was going to do next. I talked to lose track 60 plus people within 3 weeks. And one of those individuals that I got to through somebody else was this gentleman, Sam Heyman. And he had been looking for 3 years for someone to help start a nonprofit and hadn't found anyone. He was a people person. He was not going to do anything until he found that right person. And we hit it off. And he committed $25 million to me. This is 24 years ago, over 5 years, if I would put together a business plan to start a nonprofit. His original concern was, good talent was not going into the federal government at the same rate as it did when he had come out of Harvard Law School. I very quickly realized in doing my own research that getting talent into government was actually just part of the problem. That really you needed a good manager of talent or a good draw to bring good talent in. So there were sort of two parts to this, making sure that we transform government to make it a more effective actor and excited a new generation into government service. And so that was really the genesis of the Partnership for Public Service, and something that I had no clue that I would do and had not been on my radar screen until I met him. He asked me for 10 or 12 references, a very thorough person, including someone who didn't like me, was the way he described it. But at the end of the day, he and I really did hit it off, and it was a really wonderful partnership over the course of the next almost 10 years before he died prematurely, and very powerful. We did a lot of good stuff together, and I have great admiration for Sam Heyman.
Well, to kind of frame your work, I want to read a couple sentences from your website and have you maybe expand. You write, while others may debate whether government should be bigger or smaller, we focus on making it better. We serve as a bridge across the political aisle to build a government that meets its fundamental responsibilities to the public, no matter the political makeup of any presidential administration or Congress. And then in your vision statement, you say we envision a dynamic and innovative federal government that effectively serves our diverse nation. We need an effective government to solve big problems. So play off that if you would, Max, just sort of your foundational mission.
Yeah, no, and obviously we will get to this, but the world has changed, and we'll have a good conversation on that. But look, I mean, the core insight here, just to start from first principles again, is that we have one tool for collective action as a society, to deal with our big problems, and that's the federal government. And what's quite remarkable, the million or so nonprofits, historically, with respect to government, they all focused on their policy preferences. You're in the environmental world, you push your climate or whatever else policy. You're in the poverty alleviation world, you push your policy on X or Y, whatever else it might be, national security, whatever it might be. And the insight that we had was that policy is only as good as your ability to execute it. And it's such a fundamental proposition in the for-profit sector. The good CEOs spend 90+% of their energies on executing the ideas. The ideas are a small part of the equation. And you certainly know that there is no such thing as a good idea if you can't get it done. When it comes to the public sector, and this includes business leaders, they all deal with government without appreciating or implementing that very core proposition. So our theory of the case was we need to, as a nonprofit, try to fill that gap, focus on that execution imperative that is otherwise missing in our government. And, like all knowledge-based organizations, that is primarily around people issues. So we are seeing this play out in more dramatic terms in today's world, but the idea is real, and it's not just at the national level. This is true at state and local. And my dream had always been to see a franchise of partnership-like organizations at the state and local level. And I'll come back again to this, in terms of our current incarnation, that we are trying to do it directly rather than as a franchise. But it is truly fundamental. So much of what is driven dissatisfaction with what our government does for the American people and our federal level, and again, state and local level, is the fact that no one's minding the store. We don't have the prioritization of these operational issues, and there are some reasons for this that I'm happy to go into, but that's what we're about. And all of our efforts have been to find ways for us to intervene to address that gap from thinking about the lack of continuity of leadership. We've got our 5 C's, but continuity, connectivity, the federal level, you have everything vertically organized. You don't have, most problems of the day require multi-agency, multi-sector, multi-level government response. So how do you create that connectivity that's necessary? We believe we have to be catalytic because at the end of the day, you can't brute force this. So finding the interventions that can create high leverage is really important. So like our Center for Presidential Transition is an example of that. Credibility, being data driven, and having persuasive capability is fundamental, and constructive. It's another one of the C's that is really vital because in the public sector, there's a lot of infrastructure to find problem and very little defined solution. And it's a little bit like the idea execution dichotomy. Finding the problem is not the goal here. The goal is to actually an outcome, and that requires you to solve for that problem. And the only way you do that is to find good things. Looking only for the bad will not get you to where you need to be. So that constructive piece is, underappreciated in importance, and something that we need to see a lot more focus on than we've had so far. So anyway, that gives you a flavor of how we've thought about it over time, and we've had to move very quickly with a different approach, same goals, but a different approach given the current administration.
We're going to get to current affairs in just a sec. One thing I'd like to talk about for a sec also is just your focus on public leadership. You have a public
Yeah.
leadership
Yes.
institute. You have a wonderful public leadership model that I would really encourage students to look at. And at one point, you say capable and responsive leaders rarely appear by accident. So talk about the imperative of leadership training for the public sector.
So this comes back to the catalytic point that I raised earlier. There are 2 million federal civil servants, and you're not going to be able to change those, each and every one of them. But if you change the leadership and the leadership capability, that's how you leverage across the entire organization. And this is true in any environment, any organizational environment. So leaders are fundamental to the success of organizations. And honestly, if you gave me the choice of like excellent system and poor leaders, or excellent leaders and poor system, there's no choice. Like you take the excellent leaders because they will make even the poor system work, and bad leaders will make even the best system fail. So leaders in a knowledge-based world again are really everything. Back to the proposition I made earlier about good jobs, you want to be with good people. That is the most important ingredient for a meaningful experience, and meaningful experience comes with like real activity and change. So now our own leadership model in the public sector, I think the distinctive element of it is the really powerful, again, come back to purpose, way in which the foundation of being a leader in the public sector is a recognition and a focus on the public good. You recognize that you're a steward of public resources. And I will say historically, it always felt a little bit like that was a no duh proposition. Of course, that's the way it has to be. If you're working for the government, you're working for the people, and you're looking out for the public's interest, not your own. And this will eventually come back around, as you say, to current events. But that is the most important issue that we are facing with this current administration, because for the first time in 140 years, we've got a president who believes that the government is there for his own personal interest rather than for the public's interest. So our leadership model is sort of bullseye under assault in what is happening today. And we not only need to get back to a point in which the expectation is that the public leader is there for the public good, but we need to really make sure that the leaders that we have understand the full set of implications for that proposition, because they they suffuse the entire set of activities that you have to be thinking about as a real government leader. We in the past had been training almost 10,000 executives a year in the federal government, and we're now trying to do this work at the state and local level. But it really is powerful and important, and it produces results. This is not, again, an academic exercise. It produces better results for the American people. It produces better government and stronger democracy, which again is our mission.
Well, Max, I'm struck by the notion of just how leadership kind of stance towards public service has shifted and changed. And in the book that I referenced that you participated in, it begins with a John F. Kennedy quote. And I want to read it and just kind of understand how we've gone from JFK to
Yeah,
Donald Trump. But
yeah,
but Kennedy's comment is, let the public service be a proud and lively career, and
right,
let every man and woman who works in any area of our national government, in any branch, at any level, be able to say with pride and honor in future years, I served the United States government in that hour of our nation's need.
right.
How did we get from JFK to Donald Trump? And let's also touch on the role of Ronald Reagan, who's famously said, government is not the solution, government is the problem. So give us a little bit of a primer on how we've gotten to this current moment.
Yeah, and I don't think, it's interesting your citation of Reagan. I think Reagan would be as appalled by what is going on right now as every other former president, Democrat or Republican, going back to Jackson in the 1820s. And we really have backslid. I mean, the last time we had a spoils system, which is what Donald Trump is instituting right now, it was 140 years ago, and we had a president that was assassinated by a disgruntled job seeker, President Garfield, which was the final straw that led to the recognition that it was no way to run our country. And the Pendleton Act was passed that started us off on a journey of a more professional, nonpartisan civil service. And never, I mean, we still have 4,000 political appointees. It's still the vestige of the spoil system has been there for a long time, but nothing like this. So the reason why I distinguish between the JFK proposition and the Reagan one that you mentioned is that um, there has been, and it really stems from, I think, the Vietnam War and Watergate, a substantial decline in public trust in our government, and then a political opening uh, to attack civil servants and to attack our government. And it didn't start actually with Ronald Reagan. If you look at Jimmy Carter, I mean, I mentioned, growing up in Iowa, and Carter, really made Iowa made Carter, let me put it that way. Jimmy Carter ran against Washington, and Washington was code word for the federal government, even though 85% of the federal workforce is outside of DC. In the public's mind, it was DC. And it became sort of easy for politicians of both parties to use the federal government worker. I'm not going to use the word bureaucrat because it's like saying quack or ambulance chaser for lawyers or for doctors. Um, it became an easy way of scoring political points, even though you were running against the people who you needed to actually deliver on your promises. So it's, short-term expedient, long-term stupid, because you're demeaning the workforce that is actually really vital to your ability to get stuff done. So how do we wind up with Donald Trump? I think is a different proposition. And part of it is that trust in our institutions and trust in our government has, gone into the toilet. And some of that is from the fact that our government is a legacy organization that hasn't kept up with the world around it. It hasn't met the customer expectations of the public in the way that many other, successful modern businesses have. And that has not been the fault of the civil servants, but of the political leaders who have not minded the store. They have not prioritized or invested in the improvements of the institutions that they were responsible for. And the public didn't hold them accountable for that. It should have. So a big piece of this is government not keeping up with expectations. And a big piece of it is that um, we've had a government that has never promoted itself, never advertised its accomplishments. So pointed out the book Who is Government? In our research, what we've seen is that most Americans have no idea what civil servants do, and they do think about the when you say federal government, they think of bickering politicians in Washington, and not the people who are their neighbors who are providing them their Social Security checks or providing them, the medical care for veterans in their community or fighting the fires, on and on and on and on. Making sure that the hamburger meat they buy in the supermarket is not going to get their kids sick. I mean, so many different ways, so many different things. And this has gone on, for decades. And I would describe this as sort of rust in our democracy and rust in our civics. And rust over decades can cause a lot of harm. Now, a sledgehammer is a lot faster at causing that damage, and that's what we have today in Donald Trump. But he, I think, comes to us on the backs of failed investments in the capability of our government to meet the needs of the public of the day and failed communication to the public about what they were getting already and the good things. So I think that is a big part of why we have Donald Trump, not only part of why we have him. These are things that we need to address. And I think there are opportunities for us to have a healthier democracy at the back end of hopefully the fever that we're suffering from right now.
I will just say in the book, Whose Government, I mean, there are some amazing stories. And one of them I just can't forget is a gentleman who runs like the National Cemetery Department.
Yes,
And just the utter care and meticulousness and just honor in which he approaches his day-to-day work was just, I mean, you're reading it and it's almost breathtaking and just the kind of integrity that undergirds his work.
absolutely. And so interesting on that point, which is back to this point, you want a government that's trustworthy and trusted. On the trustworthy side, you were right. University of Michigan does their survey of customer satisfaction. What they found was that the cemetery services, and these are the families, and people might not understand this, but the families of service members who are deceased and the way they feel about how they are treated uh, um, is what is measured here. But the cemetery services has had the highest customer satisfaction, not just in the government, but in the private sector, and that has ever been measured by them. Like, so it is, they should be doing case studies at Harvard and every place else, like what this guy actually does. Now, on the point about the trust piece and the public understanding this, we recognized and honored in our program, our Service to America Medals program, this gentleman. And part of our purpose here was to help the public understand the good things that were happening, but to create a recognition culture inside government as well. And when I had a reporter who wanted to do a story of the VA about cemetery services, the public affairs office would not allow them to do it because they were so fearful that it could be a bad story. So this is again why, we're in the hole we're in is that our government, became defensive and, gave the Heisman to reporters and did not actually, they were so fearful they were going to get a negative story that they avoided the positive stories and that is a big problem. So changing the culture, changing the institutions so that they're actually, not just looking for the bad, but also for the good. Just as a very practical idea I had a long time ago that I'm trying to get implemented. If every inspector general report, inspector generals are the watchdogs in every agency, But if every report that they did, whenever they found something bad, they were required to find a promising practice that would be, a way of helping make that issue resolve, we would be in a different world. Super easy to find, 100 problems. A lot harder to say this is, where something is being done that would actually make it better. And we should be pushing for that second piece, not just admiring the problem, but actually, finding ways to resolve it. But it is, I agree with you. It's an incredible story, as all of them are there.
Right. Well, Max, let's talk about the current moment. We've been kind of circling around it, and I want to frame it by a letter that you and your board chair, Mr. Bernstein, um, just published recently in your impact report. And I'll just read a couple sentences and then you can expand. You say, "Today, the very purpose of government is in peril. The Trump administration is obliterating the government's apolitical workforce, arbitrarily firing thousands of federal employees who take a constitutional oath to serve the public good and seeking to replace them with political loyalists beholden to a partisan agenda. These actions violate the law, undermine transparency and accountability of federal agencies, and challenge the notion that government exists to serve the public rather than enrich the leaders of the day." Let's unpack that a little bit in terms of the thing that I think a lot of people are struggling with, which is just the legality. I mean, we have always sort of assumed, I did, that there were civil service protections. So how can it be that we read in the Washington Post on Friday that, more than 1,000 people in the State Department are going to be fired over the coming weeks? I mean, give us a sense of just what the law says and what the protections for these people is.
Yeah. No, so look, and again, as you noted, the core issue here really is this question of for whose benefit does the government exist? And the fundamental challenge that Trump has presented is his clear and very direct belief that the government's there to do what he wants. And back on the inspector generals, one of the very first things he did was fire, basically all of them because they were the watchdogs that would have cried foul for the things that he's doing. So you ask, what's the law? Um, the law is only as good as your ability to get a remedy, and you're only as good as your ability to have people who will both be unbiased and strong, judges and officials on this, and who will be able to spot the problem. So, his first moves were to strip out of the government those institutional actors that were intended to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, and the sort of plundering of our government and our society. So you asked the question what the law is. I mean, yes, there are civil service protections, and yes, they have violated them left and right. And, he has behaved very much like the property developer that he is. And, the worst case property developer shows up in the piece of land that has old growth forest and cuts down the trees despite all the environmental laws and says, sue me. And yeah, you sue him or her. And, some number of years later, maybe you get a court, order saying that you were right, but the trees are cut down and it's done, it's over with. Maybe you get some money, but you don't get the trees back because they're going to take, decades, if not scores of years to regrow, and they'll never be the same. Donald Trump has mastered this. He understands that justice delayed can be justice denied, and he's, fundamentally done plenty of things that are facially illegal, understanding that that doesn't matter as a practical matter if he can get done what he wants in the time that it will take for the justice system to catch up to him. And in some instances, he's been immunized. So, the Supreme Court's decision, which in my view was made out of whole cloth and on immunity, basically unleashed him so that he doesn't have to even fear, consequence from a future administration. So these are, I think, very bad things. Now, the courts have been important in constraining some of the activities that he's engaged in. Again, the Supreme Court has reduced the ability of district courts to to stop bad things from happening in real time. The real time point is incredibly important. They've done it without any sort of real world appreciation for how they're in fact fueling even more illegal activity by this president. And I am again as a private citizen, but as also someone who has studied the judiciary, who has been involved in the judiciary, and has been a lawyer for my entire career. It's appalling to me to watch what is occurring here. I believe the law matters. I believe the assault on the rule of law, and that includes attacking law firms and universities and any other institution that that he perceives might get in his way, like the media. These are all things that are fundamental to our democracy, and it's wrong to see. He has no restraint. One of the core aspects of being a leader in our government is recognizing the self-restraint that's necessary. Again, the prototypical, stereotypical, property developer doesn't have that self-restraint. If you are serving in the public's, leadership position, you must show it because governmental authority, even if you're ultimately held back by a court, it has enormous consequence, for people's individual lives, as well as for our basic system. So, the legal lines are being changed. They're by the Supreme Court in ways that are quite striking. Even where those lines are not being changed, the law is restraining again partially some of his conduct and in many instances not. And we are learning a lot about the fact that our system needs to be reformed. So many of the rules that he's upending are the post-Watergate restrictions that were put in place, learning from what happened with President Nixon. And I think we're going to have a very, very serious self-reflection about what we need in our government, in our systems, to respond to what we're seeing today, assuming that we get to that point. And I'm an optimist, but there is real risk there. And these are things where we're going to have to look also at the public's, understanding because rules alone are not good enough. A bad actor can find their way through, the best constructed guardrails, and we have a bad actor here, and the guardrails are not holding up. So it's not just we'll be able to pass a bunch of laws and never worry about this again. We have to look in the mirror and think about our own civics education, our own broader rules of the road. I mean, I think gerrymandering is in significant part causing some of the congressional ineffectuality that we should see. I mean, the framers set up our system to guard against an autocrat like Donald Trump by thinking that Congress would stop them, and that has not occurred. And I think there's some real examination we need to look at some of the basic underlying rules that exist that enable members of Congress or cause the members of Congress to be more fearful of losing their primary than being, effective leaders for our country.
Well, Max, you were at the Aspen Ideas Festival a couple weeks ago, and in your opening, the question sort of was posed to you. So where are we at now? And you said something, that was kind of was extraordinarily powerful. You said we are inflicting more damage on ourselves right now than almost any conceivable adversary could be doing to the United States. So we spend, almost, 800 or $900 billion in this, defense establishment. And here we have created, what is unfolding now is doing a kind of damage that Russia and China and Iran could not have dreamt of inflicted on the United States.
Yes. I think that I mean that is true. And the examples of that would include, first and foremost for me, destroying our civil service. So we have exceptional and extraordinary expertise in our government that has been fired, that has been demoralized, that has been sidelined, and for no purpose. It's not to deal with waste. That is just a flat out lie. It's creating waste, way more waste than could ever be counted for. Um, and it's a demeaning of expertise that is so vital to keep us safe. The most professional, capable cyber professionals, the most capable experts on Russia and Iran and China and North Korea. They're all being sidelined, and we have a president who believes that he knows better than not just any individual, but more and better than any collective of expertise. And uh, you know, this is again not a partisan statement. This is really important to say. It's not bipartisan. It's nonpartisan. You said it earlier. We're not about taking a position on the policy side here, but the reality is that in a good example of this would be bombing the Iranian nuclear facilities. We had a president who, with and no evidence at all, said he obliterated those facilities. And then you have the intelligence analysts at our Defense Department saying, not so fast, that did not happen. And his answer is, you don't know what you're talking about and you're wrong. And I'm gonna like probably fire you and make sure that no one else says that I was wrong in the same way in his first term he said that a hurricane went or was going to go in a different direction than all the meteorologists said. And in fact, the reality was that is not a safe world to be in when you have a president who not only makes choices based on no information from the experts, not even making a judgment based on it, but is uninterested in them, but fundamentally believes that they're worthless and is ultimately trying to get rid of them and convert them into loyalists. And that is true at the career level and at the political level, where we have, many leaders that have no business running our Defense Department, our State Department. You have people who are running many departments at the same time, meaning that they're not doing any of them right or well. Um, we are in a dangerous, fast-moving world. And to have, again, back to the fundamental proposition of what would our enemies want, to have a country run by someone who doesn't understand that, doesn't understand the value of the larger apparatus that is necessary to keep us safe in so many different ways, that's bad for us and good for them. It's not just the spoil system of the 19th century, it's the spoil system of the 19th century in the 21st century world, a much, 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 much more risky and dangerous world. And so the consequences are much larger. So I can't say this any more directly. It's not good. It's not right. It does not have to be this way. It's not a defense of the status quo. We can absolutely do better. And my hope is that the public will activate, and that will be one promising positive thing that comes out of this. And my hope is we'll actually make changes to our government that will be constructive and that will be more dramatic than we could have ever done before because of the disruption that Trump has caused. But it's not a good world we're in right now. And we need everybody to stand up and to activate. I mean, that's the bottom line here. We need people to understand why this is bad for them. They need to help communicate that to other people, and they need to take action.
Well, let's go there and let's conjure some Paul Simon optimism, or just hopefulness about this current moment. And one thing that you said, I don't know if it was at Aspen or you also spoke earlier this spring at Brookings, and what you said, frankly, for young people, you would encourage them right now to maybe go into state or local government
Yep,
or nonprofits to develop the skills, to kind of develop that public service muscle and then at another time enter the federal
yep.
workforce. So particularly to young people or to all of us, what should we be doing now given the reality that you've portrayed?
Yeah. So look, you said it perfectly, and that is, I think that, and I try to say this at the very front end, purpose. I think, look, we have needs. We need money to pay our student debts. We need money to pay our rent, to take care of not just kids, but parents these days. No question about that. But if you're going to have a satisfying life, Michael Lewis, back to who is government, said something very powerful. One of the reasons why the characters from our government that he writes about and that all those other writers write about are so appealing is they figured out the life well worth living, and that is serving the public. That sense of purpose is profound and deep and meaningful. And therefore, I think, yeah, I don't think the federal government in most instances is going to offer that um, right now. But there are state and local government, nonprofit, and even for-profit places where you can be focused on that sense of purpose and making the world a better place. And I do think that's something that feeds the soul. I think it's inherent in pretty much everybody to be able to do that. Um, More generally, in terms of what the call to action is, I think it's going to depend on individuals. But, bottom line, we all have an important voice. It's one of the things that we're trying to preserve is our democracy. I think people have to, first of all, be aware and educated about what is occurring. And it's so easy to be horrified and to turn away and to give up. Brian Stevenson, this is just something that I have to give him credit for, but the quote is, he says, hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And I think that is so true. You cannot give up hope. We all have a responsibility here to make the world a better place. And we have to keep at it no matter what. And I've found in my own life, persistence is an undervalued virtue. We win small piece by small piece. We do need to both stay educated and involved. We need to speak up. We need to stand up. We need to communicate to those that are in positions of authority that we care about these things. And we have to, demonstrate that by, voting and engaging in the public sphere as well. And we need to make sure we have, candidates who appreciate that their promises are not as good as their ability to demonstrate that they can get stuff done. And again, on the positive side, and I think Paul Simon would be 1,000% behind this. We need elected leaders who prioritize, not just say, but actually prioritize the health of the institutions that are serving us all and the workforces that are serving us all. That priority thing is so important because everyone allows the urgent to crowd out the important. If you do that over too long of a time, the important never happens. And the important is healthy public sector institutions and the talent that is necessary to make them run. So there's lots to do. There's lots of opportunity for impact. And if you're a young person, they have two sons, and what gives me a lot of hope is watching them and their friends and their generation. And not to say that my generation is not fully responsible for doing everything they can, but I think our future is bright if we look at the talent that is to come, if they stay engaged and active, and that will make us and continue to make us the greatest country on the planet and frankly in history.
Well, Max, let's close it down by talking for a second about your Service to America Awards, which are kind of
Yeah.
the Oscars for public service. And tell us a little bit about the genesis of this, how you implement it, and then maybe a story or two that would you could take to the people watching to say, okay, there are some really amazing people, working behind the scenes, doing the right thing even when no one is watching.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this comes back to those earlier point I made that so much of the challenge for the public is they don't know that the government workforce is a faceless bureaucracy, and we need to put a face on it. And the theory of our case, we started this Service to America medals, 1 year into the partnership. We started earlier, but we actually were able to host the first Sammy's gala, 1 year in, and was this notion that you did need to help the public better understand what civil servants did, and you needed internally a recognition culture. And so powerful to watch how recognition not only creates individual incentive to do risky and good things, but also raises the awareness of others about good things that then they adopt. Because I have found in the government that pretty much everything that needs to take place is actually happening someplace, but usually not in very many places. So the challenge is not dominantly finding good ideas. It's actually spreading those good ideas across the entire architecture of our government. So, as you say, let's make this really concrete. It's unbelievable. We have over 800 honorees since when we started. You can go to the serviceamerica.medals.org website, roll over and see these like eye-watering stories, everything from the FBI agents who solved the Birmingham bombing case 40 years after the fact to a gentleman who's, eradicated polio in India, no small thing, to, the scientists here who really figured out how to create the COVID vaccine in record crazy time, to, nuclear, waste cleanup that happened decades ahead of schedule and tens of billions of dollars more cheaply. The list goes on and on and on and on of these really cool big things that federal employees have done that have made all of our lives better. And I think we we will solve for those problems by building on the successes that already exist. And I do think I am optimistic about our future. That purpose of our government is so powerful that if you married it against even just competent leadership, you would have extraordinary additional results and achievement from our government. Largely the deficit in our government is not around purpose. It's around the quality of the leadership that we have. And, that starts with the American people, making sure that's something that they prioritize and they vote on. And that will change, who we get running our country.
I guess the final question, Max, I mean, what role will the partnership play in this next period? I mean, in the most concrete way, I mean, how are you going to be, what are you going to be focusing on the next 3.5 years to get us to a different place?
So this has been a extraordinarily difficult period for us, just to be very direct and honest about it, because our very purpose and DNA was put on the chopping block, the idea that government's there for the public good. And it has meant, a consistent mission, better government, stronger democracy, but a entire change of the work that we do organizationally. So we are now focused on supporting those civil servants in a time of unprecedented challenge. They're getting fired, attacked, mistreated in the most brutal way and for no reason. So you mentioned this. We provide answers to the questions they have, coaching, legal support, on and on and on. The second piece of what we're focused on is fighting the narrative battle, helping the public understand that what is happening is really bad for them. We still haven't talked about the fact that, our science establishment, probably the biggest engine of our success as a nation, is being blown up again for no reason. You think about our trade deficit that the president says he's concerned about. Our universities have the most positive trade surplus of any sector of our society, and he's attacking them. Like, since when does the leader of your country attack your most successful product and try to destroy it? Makes no sense. Um, and we're focusing on state and local government, which is brand new markets for us. So this is extraordinarily challenging. I mean, I'll say I was a lawyer by training, managing in nonprofits. What I've learned is it's not, again, the ideas. You have a double bottom line, you have a mission, and then you need the resources to run your organization. My headaches are all on the resource side. It's not on the ideas and anything else like that. That's easy. But frankly, there are no efficient capital markets to make this stuff work and run. So that's what I struggle the most with, and that's what I'm focused on. But I'm proud of the people I'm working with. They have made a huge pivot, and we're making a big difference. And we're trying to, and again, in a very different world, create better government and a stronger democracy.
Final question, how can people watching this help you?
Well, the first thing they can do is to learn and care and to document what's going on and to as you said, you hold up Michael Lewis's book before the Who is Government. He did the Fifth Risk, and he's working on stuff right now, which is tremendous. But we need the public to understand what is going on, and everyone who may be watching this has their own social network. They should share it. They should go to our website. We have a lot of information about what we do. I will be remiss if I don't say we need support. So that would be phenomenal to get support from folks. And they need to care and engage. And that's not just personally, but through, in our world today, the ability to network through your social media, through your in-person connections. Those are all really powerful and important. This is an all chips on the table moment for us. Like I believe, this will be a moment when you're going to have to, for the future, answer the question, what did I do? And did I do everything that I could? That is the question I constantly ask myself, and I will keep asking myself till we get to a better place.
Great. Well, Max, thank you again so much for your work and your comments and your passion on this. I'm sure Senator Simon would be happy that his former campaign driver is
Yeah,
is
yeah,
pushing such an important and
yeah.
constructive effort.
Well, John, it's a pleasure. I will say that I've done a lot of interviews, and no one has been more thorough. And I appreciate the real effort you've gone to understand what the partnership is and what we're trying to do. And it really is quite remarkable. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. So thank you, and thanks to everyone who's watching, and hopefully the people that you'll get to watch this as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching this show. We will have a video of this conversation on our website. Please share it with family and friends. Show everyone the important work Max is doing. And thank you for supporting us and keeping the memory of Paul Simon alive and well. Thank you so much.